Welcome to the August 11th, 2026 meeting of the Palo Alto City Council Policy and Services Committee. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Absolutely. Chair Lithcott-Hames,
Here.
Vice Mayor Stone.
Here.
Councilmember Rectal.
Here.
And I believe Councilmember Rectal has a statement to make about his location.
Okay. Yeah, I am in the Huntsville Holiday Inn Research Park. I am attending the meeting remotely using standard teleconferencing. I am participating from my hotel's business center, which is very loud right now, but it is publicly accessible and the posting requirements were met.
Thank you. And do we have any agenda changes, additions, or deletions? Okay, we have none. Let's move on to public comment. And I will announce that pursuant to new state regulations, the city has adapted its public comment for items not on the agenda as follows. We will take public comment for items not on the agenda in person right now, and any remote comments on items not on the agenda will be heard at the end of our meeting. So, Madam Clerk, are there any in-person public comments for items not on the agenda?
There are no requests to speak for this section.
All right, thank you. Moving on to council member questions, comments, and announcements. Anything, colleagues?
Not here.
And I apologize. I have been reading from the city council agenda from last night. So you might have wondered why there were some extra items in there. But it's because I have too many tabs open on my laptop. So as I gently segue to the correct tab, I imagine item 1 is what is in front of us. Is that correct?
Yes, your first item this evening is the Office of the City Auditor presentation on the Junior Museum and Zoo audit, and Ms. Kate Murdoch, our City Auditor, will be presenting on that.
Fabulous. Ms. Murdoch, I was just giving you extra time in case you needed it.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Good evening, committee members. Kate Murdoch, City Auditor. Today, I'll briefly present the results of our audit of the Junior Museum and Zoo. Overall, we found that the JMZ provides highly valued, mission-driven services with strong community demand. We also identified opportunities to strengthen performance measurement, management of the growing education program, and documentation of safety and compliance activities. Next slide, please. The objective of the audit was to determine whether the Junior Museum and Zoo is operating effectively and efficiently to fulfill its mission. Our work looked across JMZ operations, including educational activities, financial and program data, staffing and administrative processes, guest services, animal care, emergency preparedness, and safety and compliance. Next slide, please. A little context before we get to the findings. The Junior Museum and Zoo reopened in November of 2021 following a major renovation supported in large part by the Friends of the JMZ. Today, it includes more than 65 species and approximately 85 animals. Its education program is also substantial, with approximately 20 educators and instructors delivering more than 2,700 science lessons across 168 schools and community centers, and reaching more than 24,000 students annually. The Friends of the JMZ continues to be an important partner, and another significant accomplishment during our audit period was that the JMZ earned AZA accreditation in 2025. And that will move on to our findings. Next slide, please. Our first finding is that JMZ delivers high-demand, mission-driven programs, but there is an opportunity to better consolidate the information management uses to assess performance. There are several indicators of strong demand. For example, staff reported that the museum sells out nearly every weekend, and implementation of the ACME ticketing system has reportedly reduced staff time associated with daily entrance duties by about 30%. The JMZ already collects useful operational information, but it isn't yet brought together into a recurring framework that gives management a comprehensive view of demand, customer experience, revenues and costs, program demand, staffing, and administrative workload. We recommend management consolidate existing information into a performance framework that JMZ and Community Services leadership review on a quarterly basis to more efficiently and consistently identify trends and inform operational, staffing, and budget decisions. Next slide, please. Our second finding relates to education, which is a major strength of the JMZ and also an area that is experiencing significant growth. In FY25, the education program delivered more than 2,700 programs or lessons. It served more than 24,000 children and students and generated more than $1 million in revenue. From 2024 to 2025 alone, programs increased by about 8%, students served increased by about 6%, and revenue increased by about 7%. The challenge is that staffing, supplies, financial reporting, and program evaluation have not kept pace with that growth. For example, the program experiences high turnover among part-time staff, and the supplies budget has increased only modestly, even as participation has more than doubled. We also found that program and financial reporting are not fully aligned, making it difficult to connect program activity with costs and revenues. Our recommendation is an integrated education management framework that brings those pieces together: program activity, staffing and supplies, costs and revenues, funding commitments, and evaluation results. That will give management better information to determine how to sustainably support future growth. Next slide, please. Our third finding is focused on animal care, safety, and regulatory compliance. Importantly, JMZ has made significant progress in this area, earning AZA accreditation as a major accomplishment, and the museum has strengthened veterinary coverage and daily animal care reporting. We did identify several areas, however, where documentation and controls could be more consistent. These included completing and documenting emergency drills, formalizing animal transport and vehicle safety expectations, and bringing compliance documentation into a more centralized tracking process. Our recommendation is therefore to establish centralized safety and compliance tracking, identifying required activities, responsible staff, documentation, completion dates, review, and corrective actions. It's also worth noting that management has already taken action since our field work, including implementing an emergency drill review checklist and completing the required drills. Management agreed with all three recommendations, and I want to thank both the JMZ and Community Services staff for their cooperation and responsiveness throughout the audit. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Murdoch. Why don't we see if there's any public comment on this item?
There are no requests to speak on item 1.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, this is a presentation. No action is required. Wondering if either of you has a set of questions or comments on the matter. Okay, let's go to Vice Mayor Stone.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report. At the end of each audit recommendation, there's a staff response. Glad to see that staff agrees with all of these recommendations and appreciate kind of laying out the plan on how to be able to, I guess, achieve those. Ms. Murdoch, have you had a chance to kind of review staff's proposed actions, and do you then agree that those actions will adequately kind of address the recommendations in the report?
I do, and we also will be doing, future follow-up work as we do with all of the audits to ensure that those recommendations are implemented.
Great. No, thank you. Well, the JMZ cherished amenity in the community, and glad to see it continues to do well, and that we're finding ways to be able to just improve it and make it serve the community even more. So thanks for everybody's work.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Rectal, do you have comments or questions?
Yeah, I have some questions here. I had some questions about the entrance duties were reduced by 30%. Can you talk about that some more? How did that happen? Or
I think it might be a question better suited for management, but basically it was through the implementation of their Acme ticketing system. So that automation helped to reduce staff time spent on those activities, but I can hand it over to management to respond further.
Yes, I think, first of all, good evening, Council. Amanda Dummel, Assistant Director for Community Services and Interim Executive Director for the JMZ as well. Yes, Kate provided an appropriate answer. So what it did was cut down on a lot of the administrative work so staff could essentially work more effectively and efficiently. So whether it's checking, a lot of it was checking in guests as they arrive, what in processing memberships and ticket sales. It's a very labor intensive process. So then the new software was able to just cut down the processing time mainly and just make it more efficient.
They just had bar scanners at the entrance. Is that what sped it up?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. The report also talks about no-shows, that we weren't tracking them. Do you have an idea how many no-shows we have?
I believe it was probably, if off the top of my head, around 20%. I can get back to you with a more specific number, but I will say that we also implemented some new processes to be able to bring that number down to help be able to have a process in place to be able to release those spots to other members as well as so we have membership spots and then general public spots. And so release those back to the community because that was one of the complaints that we were getting from members. And so we implemented a new process. And so that also has shown significant increases since we implemented the new process as well.
So if we think there's a good chance of being no-shows, should we overbook the museum?
At this time, we are not doing that just because safety is a high priority for us, especially with having lots of children and live animals in a facility. So we err on the side of caution, and we always have a buffer as well. And yeah, we actually do have a lot of times when we are full. So at this time, we're not overbooking.
Okay. Is this a revenue loss, or when people are no-shows, do we make up the attendance? We still max out the attendance?
Not always. I mean, even though we try to resell the tickets as quickly as we can. So for that particular day or that time period, it might be a loss, but I'll say overall our revenues are overperforming. So at this time, it's not a detriment.
Okay. And the report also talked about our record keeping wasn't uniform. So does this require new software if we want to make a uniform record keeping, or is it just we don't have common databases among the different groups?
Could you repeat the first part of the question again, please?
About the uniform record keeping, talking about that we have like silos of record keeping. They don't have a uniform.
Yep. So when Kate and her team visited, we had just implemented Acme like 2 months before. So a lot of this, what's really great is Acme can provide much of this information as far as the statistics for the visitor experience, the no-shows, a lot of that data for the guest experience, where sometimes the data conflicts, it comes to the financial information. So we use various softwares for the financial and the revenue data, and that's what sometimes is hard to reconcile, and that happens in all of our areas. I do think, however, there are still better ways that we can track that internally, and that'll be part of this process. I think it's just more timely, more accurate, and better systems that we're going to start to put into place. But now with Acme, as far as the guest experience and what it's able to track, far and away much better system that we have in place now that's specifically made for our museum experience that we didn't have before. And so we're able to do that now. And I think Kate's team we weren't able to fully show that since we were still in its infancy when they visited.
Okay. The report also talked about we don't connect activity to revenue. Is that something that we're trying to rectify, or?
Yep. And that's sorry, go ahead.
Oh, it's just want to know, is this something that we think we have under control, or is this going to be hard to connect the two?
That was the latter part of my last answer, and that's primarily
Okay.
the financial piece. And so I said, with some more legwork on our end, I think that's something that we can definitely do better. A lot of it's where sometimes we collect these checks, say at the end of a school year, and it posts in a different fiscal year for us. So I think we can do better tracking some of our manual spreadsheets with, even though it might not post in, say, SAP, our financial system, till the following year. That's where system to system, it's harder to reconcile. But I think we can do better with some internal processes. So yes, we have a plan in place and we'll continue to refine it.
Oh, okay. I had read that as being that, like when we send out education, we're not charging the correct amount, but that's not what they're talking about.
No,
in that.
no, it's the way it posts and the way we track it. So
Oh,
it's not
okay.
necessarily that we're financially unorganized.
Okay. The report also talks about a semi-open elevator. Can you talk about that?
Sure, it's actually a lift, which is different than an elevator. So it technically is serving the purpose that it's there for. It is not unsafe. It hasn't had any incidences, but it was, noted in the report. So we'll certainly follow up and do any due diligence that we need to. So we have looked into it. It is, half open. But it is technically different than an elevator. It is a lift, but we can certainly continue to follow up if it's an area of concern.
It's used for transporting animals, or what does it
No, it's
transport?
for people, to get up to the second level of the treehouse. And it's
Oh,
ADA accessible.
okay.
So individuals with disabilities can also participate fully in the exhibit.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, and then finally, I talked a lot about staffing and turnover. I know that this is an issue, and we limit part-time staff so we don't have to pay pensions because pensions are expensive. But turnover is also very expensive, and I wonder if we're being penny wise and pound foolish by requiring part-time use and then getting a lot of turnovers. Like the report said, it takes 6 months to be in full efficiency, and so turnover is just going to kill you. So what do you think about perhaps converting some part-time works to full-time positions?
Yeah, I mean, that's always a consideration. I think, with our financial situation with the city, we'll, examine that and see what we're able to propose during the budget season. One thing I will share that has improved significantly, I think, since Kate and her team visited, is we have human resource liaisons, HRLs that we call them, that are working within our department. And I would say that has significantly speeded up the hiring process for our part-time staff. So a big kudos to our team and human resources. So that has definitely sped up the hiring process and made hiring more efficient. So we're able to fill those vacancies a lot quicker. So I think that has helped the process as well.
Oh, very good. That was my next question to ask about human resources. Okay.
Yeah.
But overall, I was very glad to see that the management agrees. That makes me feel good that the auditor's adding value here and that we're making the JMZ even better. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Rekdal. I just have a couple of follow-up questions. To get back to Councilmember Rekdal's question about the no-shows, could you just explain what happened? What do we mean by that?
What have we implemented?
Nope. What is a no-show?
Oh, what is a no-show? So members are able to, the public and members are able to reserve tickets, I believe, up to 8 weeks in advance.
Reserve and pay for in advance?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. And often that's why we tell people, we highly encourage them to buy in advance, because if you walk up, we often are sold out at our peak times, and that's how we got our peak pricing. So that's the morning times. And so if they don't show, what we tried to implement was we at this time didn't want to move to a penalty of a fine. And so we did some encouraging emails or reminders, and then also options for rebooking before we had to move to a penalty with fines. So
Are we refunding their?
we allow them to rebook. And so we wanted to start with positive reinforcement, and we saw a dramatic decrease of letting them be able to choose to rebook their time if they couldn't make it, instead of just not coming and no consequence. So we did see a shift in people.
So when you say no consequence, if they don't come, if they reserved, don't show up, don't rebook, do we refund their?
No.
So we're not losing money on no-shows then?
Correct. I don't believe it has an expiration on that. So correct. I would have to double check, but I believe you're right.
Okay, thank you. I also appreciate that management agreed with all three of Baker Tilly's recommendations. The question I had was, These are all, the recommendations center on really structural, important things, animal care and safety, the education program, wildly expanding, doing well, but not keeping pace with its growth in terms of systems. And then the need for a performance management or measurement framework. I'm wondering, to what extent was staff already anticipating these issues? Or were Baker Tilly pointing out things that maybe staff had been moving so quickly because things are so busy and so successful over there, they hadn't even noticed that, wow, we've got some structural things that need improvement.
Yeah, no, great question. I think you're spot on. I think it was just a testament to the organizational maturity of us just growing so quickly, and then our systems and not scaling with the growth. And so I do think it's a lot of things we were already thinking about, knowing that we needed to do, and then them really just giving us the framework and the language to put it into place. So again, with them coming in last March and us now getting the report, a lot of these things are already in action, which is great. And so it's affirming in a lot of ways. And then also it just gives us the roadmap to be able to move the rest of the items forward. So yeah, it was I think a very positive audit, and we do agree with it, and we'll continue to kind of move the needle forward. And yeah, it was very helpful for us. And so I don't think anything was majorly surprising. It was just, again, the push we needed to make sure that we get these things done.
Glad to hear it. Yes.
And Ms. Dimmel's being, I think, very humble in the work that
Deputy
they're
City
doing.
Manager.
Thank
Chantal
you.
Gaines.
The JMZ previously had been before it was redeveloped, had been a completely free to enter resource for our community for many years. And so through the pandemic, when we built the new center and then having these new systems put in place, they were really building as they went along. And so this audit was a good opportunity for us to just reassess. So it's only been actually a couple of years of having these systems in place, and they're doing a great job and continuing to improve.
That's great. Thank you for adding that. Any further comments from colleagues or staff? All right, that concludes action item 1. Thank you very much, Ms.
Yeah.
Murdoch.
And
Was-
typically for the audits, we still recommend to send to council for approval, just on
Okay.
consent.
Great. So can I get a motion on that? Second?
Vice Mayor Stone,
Yes.
Councilmember Rectal,
Yes.
Chair Lithcott Hames.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Terrific. Thank you, Ms. Murdoch. Appreciate you. Thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
Demo. All right, moving on to item number 2, a recommendation that the city council approve the HISRAP grant program expansion. So who do we have? Yes.
Yes, this evening we have Ms. Lupita Alamos as well as our Human Services Manager, Sophie Pickman, here to provide information on this. And as a follow-up, it is a continuation of a previous conversation around the nonprofit work plan. And I'll let Ms. Alamos provide more information from there.
Thank you, Deputy City Manager Cotton Gaines. Good evening, Chair and Council members. Lupita Alamos, Assistant to the City Manager, and as Ms. Cotton Gaines already introduced, this is Sophie Pigman, our Human Services Manager, who will be assisting as part of this item and this discussion. So tonight's presentation is a continuation of council direction to consider the HISRAP grant program expansion. And as a little bit of background and refresher, the Nonprofit Partnership Work Plan Phase 1 pilot was launched in fiscal year 26 as an avenue to direct nonprofit requests made during the budget adoption process, which also fell outside of a city established grant funding process. So for a variety of reasons, including budgetary considerations, the Phase 1 grant process was suspended for fiscal year 27. Instead, the City Council provided direct allocations to a few nonprofits and directed the Policy and Services Committee to consider a Human Services Resource Allocation, or here known as HISRAP, expansion as a way to manage grant requests that currently do not meet the criteria or priority of needs of the program. Next slide. So in the staff report, staff talks about this proposed model, the HISRAP Plus model. And under this model, the original HISRAP process, which we'll cover in another slide, and its original funding formula remains unchanged. Recommendations in this category remained aligned with the HISRAP priority of needs. And in the infographic, this is the top part of the square, which is the original model. In the bottom segment of the graphic is the new additional funding and expansion of HISRAP. So this would be limited funding path for nonprofit programs addressing community needs identified through the needs assessment that do not fall within the adopted HISRAP priority categories. And that would be the distinguishing factor here. And it would also ensure that all requests are handled through a clear, transparent, and predictable process. And it moves away it would move away those those requests during budget adoption process. So together, the original and this expansion would be considered HISRAP Plus. So just for clarifications, we're treating this as one process. Next slide. And so this slide covers a little bit of the HISRAP guiding principles and best practices for reviewing and evaluating grant proposals. So in alignment with these, HISRAP Plus proposals would also follow the same guidelines with the differentiating factor that it would include proposals outside of those established priority of need categories. So we're trying to remain or follow the process as established. And some of this best practices. Bullet points talk about demonstrating a program service that is identified by the community that meets established evaluation criteria. It doesn't duplicate programs, etc. Creating public value. It has broad reach, increases equity, better coordination, etc. And then proposals must include a clear scope of work, organizational readiness, realistic budget, feasible timeline, and measurable outcomes. So staff feels that this criteria could also apply to the expansion, again, with the differentiating factor that it would cover those proposals outside of those established priority categories. Okay, and as I mentioned, as a refresher, this is a kind of a broad overview of the HISRAP process. I'll go over the calendar of when these happen in a future slide, but as a broad overview, this all begins with the Priority of Needs survey, which identifies the top 4 to 5 service priorities for Palo Alto. This survey is currently underway. After those results come in, the Human Relations Commission reviews and adopts the service priorities. And these then become the criteria for evaluating proposals. Then applications are submitted by eligible providers. And when those applications come in, the HRC evaluates those applications using that criteria. And makes a recommendation for the Finance Committee and ultimately for Council's final approval. And this happens usually during the budget adoption. Okay, and that's just a duplicate. Apologies. Next slide. So for the HISRAP funding recommendation, as part of the expansion, Council also expressed interest in evaluating whether HISRAP funding levels should be modified as part of the study. And staff is recommending that we keep the existing HISRAP funding methodology. And just a little bit of more information on that recommendation. Based on the last 5 funding cycles, staff looked at what those averages for funding were, and about 78% of those requests were funded, which may not seem like as high as a percentage as we would prefer, but this is not the only source and only way that the city partners with nonprofits. Just in fiscal year 27, the city adopted over 6 million to support nonprofit grants and contracts. So this is part of a big, broader umbrella of how the city gives and partners with nonprofits. Also, a few years ago, the City Council approved an annual CPI to HISRAP to ensure that this would continue to grow and keep up with growth. And additionally, the city also augments additional nonprofit requests through our Emerging Needs Fund, which dedicates $50,000 annually. So for the HISRAP the HISRAP Plus funding recommendation expansion, staff would recommend allocating between 100 and 200,000 as a starting place. This amount aligns with the unfunded demand identified through the phase 1 pilot. And it's also meaningful but limited expansion. So the new appropriation preserves the original HISRAP funding allocation for this set priority of needs. It does not take away or reduce that amount for this expansion. And I want to make that really clear. HISRAP would remain funded in at the same level using the same methodology. So this addition does not take away. This amount creates then also a feasible workload for existing staff to absorb and manage without the need to add more staff. So it's a manageable add. Finally, in looking at how this proposal would fit in this fiscal year to launch then in fiscal year 28, we have this table that shows the left hand column that says that states the current HISRAP key dates, and then the proposed HISRAP Plus key dates. And it does not delay the original time frame. We're able to accommodate that within the existing one. So just a few key dates to highlight as part of this timeline is a few changes would include a joint PNS and HRC meeting to provide feedback on HISRAP Plus as an opportunity for PNS to ask HRC for lessons learned, feedback, and just have a mutual discussion of what this proposal, how it could accommodate additional needs. I also want to point out that as part of this new process, staff would go back to council to approve the funding levels in October to ensure that we have those levels identified and be able to communicate those out to our nonprofits. And then finally, the additional change to note and flag here for the committee is that traditionally, HRC has made a recommendation to the Finance Committee for those awards. And for this proposal, we are recommending that this committee, PNS, reviews HRC's recommendation as was directed by the council. And so obviously then in June, we would have the approval of all HISRAP Plus awards. And then finally, as part of this discussion, we also are seeking that the committee provide staff with feedback on what would successful discussion outcomes look like with the HRC. So in preparation for the September meeting, what would you like to learn from HRC to help us craft that agenda? And so staff's recommendation is that the policy and services recommend that the City Council approve a HISRAP grant program expansion and provide feedback on the proposed expansion model, funding range, and implementation approach in preparation for the PNS and HRC meeting. And that concludes my presentation. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Alamos. All right, let's start with any public comment on this item, Madam Clerk.
Yes, we do have 2 requests to speak.
Terrific. You'll get 3 minutes each.
Our first speaker is Cheryl M. You said 3 minutes, correct, Chair? Thank you.
Okay. Hi, good evening, committee and council members. My name is Cheryl B. Marymount, and I'm the founder and CEO of Musical Memories Foundation. And I'm speaking tonight in support of HISRAP Plus and our experience as a Phase 1 work plan grant recipient. Thank you so much for fostering our first year of work in Palo Alto or in the Palo Alto community. That support allowed us to serve 935 experienced in life adults with varying levels of acuity here in Palo Alto through 15 musical memories programs, all at no cost to program recipients. As you know from our annual report, it was a beautiful and impactful year. We're so proud of what we accomplished, the partnerships we built, the community we served, and we learned a lot too. Your willingness to invest in a new organization meant so much to us, as we are one of the 4 nonprofits that didn't fit into the traditional HISRAP funding, yet greatly benefited from that opportunity to serve the Palo Alto senior community. Musical Memories Foundation addresses the epidemic of loneliness and isolation through music-based programming that lights up memories and lifts up seniors' lives through connection and joy, while creating economic opportunity for professional musicians and facilitators. Our work complements the direct services HISRAP has long supported, and to date, and in just over a year and a half, we've served 4,068 seniors through 116 programs. HISRAP Plus, as I'm calling it, would be a way for us to keep serving the Palo Alto senior community, growing our presence and our partnerships, and bringing high-value live music experiences and social, emotional, physical, and cognitive connection opportunities to experienced in life adults in a sustained and ongoing way. My sincerest gratitude for the city's partnership and support. We're excited about what HISRAP Plus could make possible for Musical Memories Foundation and for the many experienced in life adults benefiting from our programming, and for all the other nonprofits serving this community alongside us. I also want to note briefly and with full transparency that I had the Emerging Needs Fund application deadline marked on my calendar as September 6th rather than August 6th, and I will absolutely be submitting our application in November. That was an oversight on my part. The need is still there. I wrote the wrong date, so my apologies. Thank you so much for your time, your support, and for all that you do for us. Thank you.
Thank
Our
you.
next speaker is Elmer S.
Good evening, honorable council members and city staff. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Elmer Martinez Ceballos. I'm the Director of Public Affairs with Life Moves. We're very grateful to be longstanding partners with the city through our shared work at the Opportunity Center. And we're very excited to see our partnership evolved with the opening of the Home Key site along San Antonio Road. I'm here tonight to add our support to the expansion of the city's HSRAP grants, addressing the emerging needs and sustaining supports like the Opportunity Center through these new funds would be a really transformative opportunity for Life Moves and other nonprofit partners at a time when we're seeing traditional funding sources at the state and federal levels shrink or become complicated by new requirements. We really appreciate all the work that the city does to support the nonprofit community in Palo Alto, and for setting these new strategic ways to expand the support and address these challenges that are impacting our most vulnerable neighbors. Thank you again, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you all.
Thank you. Okay, colleagues, who'd like to start us off with questions or comments on this potential expansion of HISRAP and a new procedure?
I can start.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Rectal.
Okay. So phase 1, when it was phased out, some of those recipients are moved into the departments. Like Magical Bridge, I think that was moved in, and YCS and UNAF and Neighbors Abroad always was kind of in the departments. But so are those going to remain in the budget, or are they going to be pulled out of the budget and put into this new HISRAP?
So in fiscal, those are some of the nonprofits that the council provided direct allocations for fiscal year 27. Of those that you listed, there are a few that are ongoing and were listed as ongoing during the budget deliberations. This included YCS. It included Neighbors Abroad, and it included Oh, let me think.
I thought Magical Bridge got a direct allocation, didn't they?
They got a direct allocation, correct, but this was considered additional funding that was provided for fiscal year 27. There were 3 distinct nonprofits as part of that option C back then that was included. And that was, I'm sorry, it was Neighbors Abroad, Environmental Volunteers, excuse me. These were the 3 nonprofits that were identified as requesting to be operational. Then there was an additional direct allocation, and that included Magical Bridge, CalAV, and UNAF. Those were the 3 additional allocations that the council provided for fiscal year 27.
Okay, so of those, the first 3 you mentioned, they're going to be still direct allocations because they're ongoing.
Those
Is that
3
correct?
yes, the 3 that are ongoing are Environmental Volunteers, Neighbors Abroad, and YCI.
Okay. But CalAV, UNAF, and
Magical Bridge
Bridge.
were
And-
given additional direct allocations for fiscal year 27.
Okay, so when we're sizing this others category in his wrap, we should be considering those as potential applicants.
Correct.
Okay. And how do we define human services? So who's going to qualify for the regular his wrap and who's going to be in the others category?
So the original or the his wrap priority of needs are identified through the Human Services Priority of Needs survey. That identifies the top 3 or 4 categories that will be funded. That is what typically gets allocated the funding for his wrap. For the expansion, we're considering that everything outside of those categories that are identified would then be covered under this expansion. I would also like to add that as part of that survey, we did add categories such as arts and culture and climate action / environment as additional categories for the community to identify.
Okay, so what is it? Is that on that timeline chart when that surveys?
Yes, if we go back to the timeline, the calendar slide, it shows that it's happening now.
Okay, and so this goes out to the community. So this is just on the website, or how does it get filled out?
We're going to have our Human Services Manager, Sophie Pickman, answer that one.
Hi, yeah, Sophie Pickman, Human Services Manager. So we have 2 different surveys that goes out to the community. One is directly for constituents. That one is put out on the website, on our website for Human Services, and then also emailed out to the HRC and to any partners that way. And then we also directly give it out to our service providers that we already partner with. So including anyone who had applied for the nonprofit partnership work plan, they would have been emailed and allowed to take this survey.
And then we just count off the ballots, or how are the totals calculated?
So once that comes in, part of this survey is a ranking, and we'll look at that ranking based on all of the surveys and then be able to determine what are the top 5, what are the top 10 priorities from that. But we're also going to compare that to what constituents are saying as well. So there'll be an in-depth analysis of both surveys to make sure that we're appropriately allotting priorities.
Okay, so someone who was in his wrap last year might get left out in the cold if their category is not chosen?
No, so they would still be eligible for this plus category. So if we have the main priorities funded by us, that top, if we go to the slide with the top priorities and then the others below it. Yep, the graphic. Sorry. So imagine, we get a stack of 30 and the top 20
are applied to that top priority. So they're related to those top 5 priorities that are identified through the priority of needs. We rank those through the normal HISRAP process, and then those go to the side, and then we look at all the other proposals. If all the other proposals have some relation to something that was ranked within the priority of needs, then they will also be evaluated through the same HISRAP process, obviously minus the question, how do you relate to the top priorities?
Okay, and so HRC actually designates, or is the staff that designates the priorities? Who looks at that survey?
The staff look at the survey and then present a report to the HRC. They then present that to council.
Okay, that helps. Can you move back to the timeline chart?
Actually, may I interrupt for
Oh,
one
yeah,
second,
please do.
Councilmember
Yes.
Rectal, just to ask an additional question here because I'm a little confused. So I guess the question, he threw out the hypothetical, can someone who was funded through his RAP in the prior cycle get left out in the cold in the next cycle? And you said they could apply for the his RAP plus additional funding. It sort of begs the question, how likely is it that something that fit a top priority in the last cycle will no longer fit a top priority? How often are the top priorities changing? How many top priorities do we have? Aren't we talking about unhoused services and mental health and this and that? So are the priorities changing much year to year?
So we put out this survey every 2 years, and it's a combination of through other organizations and then put out by the city. But no, the top priorities have not changed that much. It generally is directed towards vulnerable populations. So part of this is to expand that idea of what vulnerable populations might be.
So to answer his question, or to go back to his question, if they weren't funded, if they were funded in the last cycle and not in the next cycle, but they still address a top priority. It's that they didn't make the cut vis-a-vis whomever else applied. And you're saying now we're going to have some additional funds to perhaps support them, even though it's not a new need, it's not an emerging need, it's not a different type of need.
So are you asking, could they be if they don't meet the qualifications for that top priorities because of their application, would they be reevaluated for other category?
I guess Councilmember Rectal's question supposed that somebody might have been funded under the prior cycle and might not be under the new. And your answer was they could apply for this sort of 1 to 200,000 that you're proposing. And I'm trying to figure out who would go in that category.
So I think I misspoke. If they applied to the top priorities and they were aligned with those top priorities and they did not meet the criteria based on the HRC recommendations, they would not be considered for those other proposals. Those other proposals are anything that's related to the priorities that are not related to those top 5.
Thank you. Over to you, Councilmember Rectal.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, chime in if you have thoughts. But it's still quite possible the priorities would change. Right, so then you're saying that if the priorities changed and this previously funded nonprofit was left on the cold, they could still then apply for the other proposals, the bottom category. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay, I understand. Okay, can you slide over to the timeline chart again? Okay, so I'm looking at the flow here. Down in May, the Finance Committee does the HRC awards and the PNS does. Are those the same awards, or is one half and the other is doing the other half? How is that?
I just want to clarify, apologies for the confusion on this table. So I was just trying to demonstrate the current HISRAP key dates without the expansion, and then what it would look like if this committee continues with the model as proposed. The column on the right-hand side would supersede the dates to the left. But I wanted to make a point
Okay.
that it does not change the ultimate awards being awarded in June.
Okay, that makes sense. And so now, so we're just on the right column then. And so finance is left out of this. I mean, should finance be, is there a
Finance is-
role, is there a
Oh,
role
God.
for finance here?
Yeah, apologies, Councilman Voldemort. Yes, so Finance Committee is not necessarily excluded. The Finance Committee reviews during their budget deliberations or budget hearings, excuse me. They review all recommendations, including the amounts that would be part of his RAP Plus.
For this 100K to 200K, who's going to decide that amount?
That is going to be going to the City Council in October.
Okay. Okay, yeah. I mean, the thing that's difficult is that finance thinks that this is a finance issue and policy and services thinks this is a policy and services issue. So I think if in doubt, bring it to the whole council. It may not be the most efficient to deal with all 7 at one time, but it's probably the most equitable. So, okay, that's all I have. Thanks.
Yeah, and I was just going to add that we would have to be careful about overlapping jurisdiction to avoid a Brown Act violation. Just if there's going to be potential overlapping jurisdiction between policy and services and finance.
Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Strong?
Thank you. And I mean, ultimately, this ultimately gets to finance because they review the budget in May, and this will ultimately have to, no matter what we do at that October meeting, the finance committee will be dealing with the actual budget. Well, this will truly be approved at that time, so I'm not too worried about that. But big thanks on this. I think this is a huge improvement from the last. I never know what the heck we called that thing. So I like the name, the branding is so much better. I think the process is better. I'm glad to see the HRC being incorporated. Kind of one question there, has the HRC had a chance to review this proposal yet, or would that take place if PNS kind of endorses it tonight? Does that then take place at this joint meeting in September?
Yes, we wanted to get direction tonight before we fully send it to the HRC.
Okay, perfect. And then a couple other small questions that I think we're on the right path here. With the emerging needs fund, does that then disappear? Does that just become a part of his RAP Plus?
No, so the Emerging Needs Fund would not be touched in any way. We would want to market it more as a place for innovative and new programs to go as a test ground, and then to see if they would later, be more qualified for his RAP Plus.
Great.
And just a note, the Emerging Needs Fund is a smaller pot of money and the grants are typically smaller.
About like 50,000, right, is the
I
pot?
believe total it's 50,000.
Okay. So I like the different tiers we're creating because that has always been, I think, a challenge for his RAP recipients is generally HRC and the council likes to, once you're accepting those funds, I think it's really hard to stop then giving those funds. And since the pot doesn't grow all that much more, it's really hard for new nonprofits to be able to kind of get the foot in the door. So I like now sort of this 3 different tiers to be able to provide those opportunities and build those relations and over time, hopefully, build them up with city funds. So I think this is good. So I'm looking at my last question to see if this has already been answered. Okay, so on the timeline, I think you answered this. I just want to make sure because I think that I know this is something that I really wanted to see, and I think ultimately council kind of endorsed this. So if council if council approves this, or at least approves it, funding levels in October. So the HRC, assuming this all moves forward and the council embraces this idea, the HRC will then will review applications for this, similar to how they do that with his rap, and then his rap plus comes to policy and services, but regular his rap does not. That continues on its typical path to city council, right? So it's only his rep plus where there's this now additional layer where it comes to policy and services and then goes to council.
So we're considering this one process so as to not create that confusion of which one do I apply for. So we're considering now this being called His Wrap Plus. So it's one process, one application. HRC reviews all applications. One set of criteria is just based on the identified priority of needs, and then the remaining of the applications get prioritized. I mean, it's not prioritized, evaluated during using the guidelines and the those principles from that slide. So it's all one process.
Okay, so does policy
and then HRC makes that recommendation to policy and services, and you would see the categories for those that would meet the priority of needs, and then those recommended for the additional funding, the expansion piece. So that would be the distinction of how they would be presented for PNS.
Okay, so HRC makes their recommendations. HRC reviews them all, makes the recommendations of his rep and his rep plus. His rep continues to be kind of streamlined to council, which is typically just kind of approved with very little discussion and a lot of deference to the HRC. And then his rep plus, though, gets an additional stop here at policy and services before going to council.
No, they all go through policy and services before they go to council. So
his rep as well.
Or the whole thing is his rep plus. So every single application that goes through the HRC will then go through policy and services and then go through the city council. The same system that was done before, just substituting policy and services policy and services for finance committee. But we want to keep it all together.
Could we perhaps pull up the chart that shows the prior calendar and the proposed calendar? Because I think it might help us understand the flow. And I think what's interesting as I listen to Vice Mayor Stone's questions and look at the look on his face, it's a lovely brand, his rep plus, and yet it's creating confusion. The old is his rep. It sounds like the new is his rep plus, but you're telling us actually the whole thing, looking at the graphic that you had, the whole thing will be called his rep plus, which maybe suggests the whole thing should just be called his rep and we're just changing it. We're adding more funds to it, right? So I think this is something to consider. It's not the most germane or most important issue, but there is already confusion about that. And I think that's going to persist.
And if I can add on to that, outside of the nomenclature of the naming, I think part of the question that Vice Mayor Stone is asking is, does his rep need to go through a committee currently? And the answer to that is yes. It's been going through the finance committee. And so in order to give the same committee the review of it they're recommending that all of it comes through Policy and Services Committee instead. So just want to clarify that there's already a council committee in the process. It's just currently finance, and that will be switching to Policy and Services.
Yes. Okay. Thanks for that. Thanks for that clarity. I think that's the right. I think that's the right move. Because I always kind of felt finance committee reviewing the HRC's recommendations felt a bit off. I think it was kind of more focused on the dollar amount and less focused on the real kind of needs. And since we didn't have, there wasn't much discussion on, there's never really changing the dollar amount. I think HRC, I'm sorry, I think Policy and Services is the right place for that. So I like that. And yeah, we'll just have to figure out, because I was definitely confused on the HISRAP Plus, thinking that was a separate process. So that all makes more sense now. Great. Perfect. Yeah, I think the joint meeting, just kind of hearing that feedback from HRC on how what they think about this process. I mean, I would imagine they're going to be favorable of it, but I'm curious if they see any potential challenges there in doing this. And I think the dollar amount that you've proposed is really smart. I don't see it as arbitrary, and I think yeah. So that's where I'm at. I think more money we can put towards this, the better. So I'd like to see the high end of the $100,000 to $200,000 range, but that'll be for the full council. All right, thank you, and thanks to staff.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I want to also join the chorus of appreciation for the work that's gone into moving this pretty complicated effort to winnow and clarify, better define, create more transparency. To do that as we're running a city, it's hard. And I think you've done a really great job at proposing something new. Just to kind of continue on with the level of questions or the type of questions that have been raised. The first to this question of the role of finance, I thought you did an excellent job in the staff report of articulating this approach would not eliminate the finance committee's role. You said that. The finance committee will retain its role through annual budget review. And in this way, Policy and Services would provide policy direction oversight for the program that originated from the referral, while finance would continue to have input on the overarching allocation. I think that's really important language to carry forward. The current chart that shows the old and the new probably needs a little augmentation to show the through line for finance. Because right now it says it comes to PNS in May and then council in June, and finance is not listed on that chart. So we just want to make sure everyone's confident that finance is not being overlooked. They're just, there's an extra step now, which is PNS is actually reviewing the allocations from a policy perspective, and then it's going on to finance. Okay. All right. I am also in favor of the top of the range. I remember when you and I, Vice Mayor, were on finance in my first year on council, and I learned a lot about HISRAP from you, and you were making the case that HISRAP hadn't been augmented in a number of years, and it was time to really look at that. And another 200,000 came to it. As a result, we moved from about 691 to 891, if I recall correctly. So I think, like you, I'm interested in making sure that this allocation is adequate to meet the need. I mean, we all care about this. I would be in favor of the higher end of the range, particularly because we were told that phase one, it said we funded 500,000 through phase one. So we did 500,000 in phase one. Then we said for this year, we're not doing phase one because it was so complicated and so on, and we have HISRAP. And so we're kind of taking a pause with the intention to kind of present something that meets the community's needs in a streamlined, well thought out procedural way. so that the process itself isn't so complicated. You can't understand what to apply for and so on. But the fact remains, we doled out an extra 500,000 and now we're saying it'll be 100 to 200 extra. So I'm wondering how, you said in the staff report, it closely aligns with the demonstrated level of eligible but unfunded demand identified through the NPW phase 1. But I'm not getting that, because if we gave 500 and that wasn't even funding all of it, and now we're saying, let's cut that by 80%.
Yeah, I think what we mean by that is that when we looked at the organizations that were not funded through phase 1, it amounted to about that much. A lot of the organizations that were funded through phase 1 were indeed HISRAP recipients. So when we look at like what hasn't been, what is a need that hasn't been funded, it amounted to about that much.
So if we were to fund the phase 1s and the unmet need left over from what we couldn't achieve with phase 1, we'd really be at 700,000 or 600 to 700,000.
I guess as staff, we wouldn't be considering what would have been qualifying under HISRAP. Because for a while we were also considering, excluding that because they had already received an allocation. So some of those recipients applied with additional programming proposals, and some of them were just requesting what hadn't been funded in their original request. So that's how we came to the 1 to 200,000.
So the 1 to 200,000 is stuff that wouldn't/shouldn't have been funded under the traditional definition of HISRAP. We decided to add that. We're calling it plus. But we acknowledge that there are nonprofits that are basically saying you're only funding me at 78%, and I'm really hoping you'll fund me at 82, 85%. So they took a second bite at the apple, in part because the messaging around it was confusing about whether they could or couldn't.
That's correct.
Okay. I would love to know more about what it means to not fit HISRAP today. So like the public commenter with the Music Memories Foundation, great to hear about your program and to see the enthusiasm on your face as you describe it. It sounds like we had 4 phase 1 orgs that were non-HISRAP. Does that sound right? And they didn't fit HISRAP. They were outside of HISRAP. What were they? What does it mean to not fit HISRAP and yet to be deserving, according to your good judgment, of funding through that phase 1 process? Maybe the type of category they're in, or what was it that makes them different? So the musical memories is for, you said,
Yeah.
well,
So the criteria was based more on the stated priority of needs. As the human service is a very broad umbrella. But when we said that they didn't meet the criteria, it was that they would not have elevated to the priority or needs. And some of these may just have missed the application period, right? So last year was not a period where we were opening HISRAP applications. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. And so that opportunity was not available to some of these. Like, for example, job train is a human services needs. However, it was not identified as a priority category in the current cycle. And Sophie can correct me if I'm wrong.
And I think just looking forward for human services and this idea of plus, human services is such an evolving area, and a lot of different things can apply to human services. So this is why it gives us leniency by adding this plus, but it's really based on what Palo Altans are saying they need. But originally, maybe this organization just didn't make the direct argument that they related to the top priority, but we could see that they could potentially relate to that direct priority.
When you say Palo Altans are telling us what the need is, you referred earlier to the surveys. Approximately, roughly, how many surveys do we get?
Since this is my first year with the city, I would have to look back at how many surveys they received for the 2024, I think was the last one.
And they're reaching out to service providers as well as individuals. And so some of the number of survey respondents could be representing sort of demographics of people within the city beyond just themselves.
Okay. I'm still confused. I am thrilled that we're doing this. I, for one, find the buckets and baskets, the number of them, the extent of them to be confusing. And when we sit on finance committee and it's June and all of a sudden we're talking about, oh, but this one, oh, but this one, oh, but this one, we're sort of bringing in some at the last minute. And I always find myself wondering, okay, what's the rationale for these being outside of the normal process? And I'm hoping that we're, through this effort, going to bring greater coherence, bring, fewer processes, greater clarity. And so when Councilmember Rectal raised the question of the nonprofits that were funded directly, I think is how we put it. We put them into two categories: Magical Bridge, CalAV, and UNAF were three additional allocations. You said environmental volunteers, YCS, YCI, and Neighbors Abroad were ongoing allocations. And then there was the sense that one of those two sets is going to now be part of HISRAP Plus. I'm not sure that I get it. Can you help me understand which ones are going into HISRAP Plus, which aren't, and why?
Yes, you're correct. As you summarized, that the environmental volunteers, Neighbors Abroad, and YCS are, as at council's direction, considered now operational and as part of the department budgets. And additional direct allocations were given to Magical Bridge, CalAV, and UNAF.
And in the future, those three would
have to apply for HISRAP.
And would CalAV meet the human services need?
So I'll let Sophie speak about how we've expanded those categories.
So it would depend on what is identified during the survey. But I think that if you look at what CalAV does, it's providing services mostly for free for potentially vulnerable populations in Palo Alto. So if they're able to make that argument within their application and it relates to something that is identified in the priority of needs, I don't see a reason that they couldn't be at least reviewed, their application reviewed, and then evaluated based on the rest of the criteria for HISRAP.
I see that Councilmember Rectal has a question.
Yeah, I mean, there's not one right way of doing this, but when I look at this, it seems more complicated than it has to be. In my mind, there's kind of two buckets. One is things that help people who are vulnerable, and the other is things that help the community. And so like CalAV, I would think you put in the community bucket, and all these other things, whether it be job train or other homeless services, would go in the helping vulnerable people category. And I wonder, are we gaining much from all the work that we're doing for the survey? I don't know. What do you think? What do we find out from the survey in past years that we didn't know ahead of time?
I'll take a crack at this and I'll let Sophie add anything onto it. I believe the intention of the survey in the past was really just to make sure that even as you spoke of the vulnerable category in the community, there's a variety of need year over year. And so instead of assuming that all of the needs would be housing or homelessness focused one year, or all of the needs would be job focused another year, it's allowing us to be able to hear from providers and people on the ground of what they're seeing as a more specific need. For example, right now, we are assuming that the needs assessment will come back slightly different given the federal funding climate currently, as opposed to the last time this survey was conducted. And so that gives us an opportunity to hear from service providers and folks in the community to see, like, are certain types of funding no longer available from other sources that then the city would need to sort of fill that gap a little bit more. So we don't expect to see huge changes throughout those assessments. We do it about every couple of years, but it's noteworthy to make sure that we're meeting what is currently needed given the broader funding environment.
I think I agree with Councilmember Rectal that Cal Ave seems to fall outside the bucket of serves vulnerable populations. I don't think anyone associated with the Cal Ave revitalization music on Cal Ave and so on would have in their top 10 bullets that we're doing this to support vulnerable populations, which not to say they don't care about vulnerable populations, but I've never heard that articulated as a purpose or necessarily a benefit of it. Similarly, UNAF, an incredible film festival, no doubt beneficial to our community and the surrounding region. We're proud of it. But I think trying to squish it into a category called, serves vulnerable populations is to misunderstand its category. We have somebody here who spoke of an arts program. It sounds like Music with Memories brings music to people who might have memory issues, and it helps enliven them and provide socialization. And we can identify the vulnerable population that benefits from that music. Doesn't mean that all music benefits vulnerable populations. And I'm not suggesting these two things shouldn't be funded. I'm a big fan of them both. I'm just feeling like they're in the wrong bucket. We're trying to jam them into his rap plus. I don't like one-off allocations at the end of the year, in a meeting. And so maybe there's this other category. Councilmember Rectal said there's stuff that benefits vulnerable populations and there's stuff that benefits the community broadly. And I would encourage us to figure out what things are we funding in that category. Do they belong in departments as a part of ongoing? I think we're trying to make them fit. They're square pegs and round holes right now. We don't want to not fund UNAF. We don't want to fail to support Cal Ave when we're trying to build up California Avenue and make it what it can be. But we just haven't identified the right place in the budget for these two examples, and there may be more.
Just one thing. I think I misspoke in saying it's only vulnerable populations. It should be any services that Palo Altans are identifying as a need. But we hear the request for categories, and we can look at that.
Okay, thank you. To your question about the HRC PNS joint meeting, first of all, it'll be very exciting to have 10 of us up here at the dais. And I think it is really important to figure out how to craft that meeting. So you get what you need out of it, and everybody involved feels they were able to participate at the right level. So my thoughts on what we need feedback on from HRC, the dollar amount for the additional plus money, the expanding definition of who qualifies, these buckets that we're talking about. We also learned in our council session or study session, whatever it was, on the work plan outcome, somebody brought in the fact that some research had just been done by some important national organization that said nonprofits need multi-year grants, that for their fiscal stability, they benefit from multi-year grants. Obviously, his wrap is 2 years, which is great, but we should keep that in mind, that if we really are aiming to support nonprofits with their funding and being stable, that multi-year is beneficial. We also learned that funding upfront is important, that they need to be allocated the money and given the money rather than sort of getting, paid in a receipt fashion, in a expenses reimbursed kind of fashion after the fact. So I think that's an important, like, how the money comes and when is important for, if we're going to retool this or revamp it or make it better, let's take those things into account as well. I also think when we look at the fact that it's now going to come to, your proposal is that HRC recommendations, and it's always an HRC ad hoc, is going to ad hoc's going to do the work, report up to HRC, they're going to approve it, it's going to come to us now. We got to be really clear on what our role is and isn't. I know that a couple of years ago, we kind of stung the HRC because council members, and I was probably one of them, I read an article today that said that Claude might be becoming sentient and having feelings about its own existence. And when machines just start talking like that out of the blue, you have to just thank your God that you live in Palo Alto where all of these innovative things happen. Okay, back to my question, which I'm now derailed from because I get it. My ADHD brain loses things. What was I saying?
You were saying that you wanted to be clear of what policy and services is or
Right.
isn't.
Because I remember a couple years ago, there were hurt feelings. It was like, we did all this work. You gave us a budget. We reviewed the applications. We allocated the money. And then council, now that's always going to happen. Council, all the blues go, but I just think what we can do up front to articulate what that through line is going to look like so that PNS understands when it comes to us in May with a budget process underway. We don't have a lot of time to fuss with it, right? So that'll be a good reminder when it comes our way. Again, at the same time, it'll be our first bite at that. We'll be like, ooh, we get to just like, these are important policy questions. So I just wonder if the calendar is providing time for PNS to do what it needs to do without overstepping its bounds. Just something to consider.
And on that note, I think, and this even goes back to the funding allocation amount, as you reference, the funding allocation probably isn't as big as maybe you would want it to be, but this allows you to try this out for the first year with something that's probably a bit more reasonable for us to all get our arms around while you're doing a new process, and that may help with that timeline around the May time of year.
And the 1 to 200,000 recommended, is that for the annual 2-year process, or is it 1 to 200 per year? I'm hoping it's the latter.
We'll need to clarify that and come back.
Okay. Well, how are you feeling about the feedback you've gotten? Is there anything you wanted to tell us about what you think the joint meeting with the HRC should be like? Ms. Cotton Gaines?
Very productive. Just kidding. I think the questions that you elevated are a really good place. We can obviously spend some time explaining what the proposal is. I think that that is something that HRC will be hearing for the first time. And so we want to make sure that it's clear of what the council is recommending for us to do, and then also to explore the questions that you've elevated this evening.
I see that we have the chair of the HRC in the audience. Would it be okay for me to ask if she has some brief comments that she'd like to share with us?
Absolutely.
Chair Kraus, not to put you on the spot, you don't have to, but if you are sitting there thinking, I'd like to offer a few thoughts on how we can construct a September conversation that's joint between your body and ours to be as productive and fruitful as possible. Do you have thoughts you want to share with us? Now's the time. Please come to the microphone.
I was trying to be invisible. Didn't work, huh? I think this is an ambitious attempt to streamline a process that's been idiosyncratic outside of HESREP. And the only thing that there are 2 things or 3 things, never mind. There are a few things that I question, and staff knows. I'm worried about the shortfall in a time in which federal and state funding is being shut off to many of the NGOs that deal with the most vulnerable population across the region. The phase 1, you had $500,000 allocated. Now with HESREP Plus, it's 100 or 200,000. In the phase 1, there were 16 NGOs many of which were new. Actually, there was 4. And it was a more innovative process. So I have problems in seeing how we get to take care of 5, which was in the past. But given the challenges of the city's financial situation, I am grateful that the HESRAP budget has not been proportionally reduced. So I'm saying thank you to the city of Palo Alto. But I still worry about how we squish this all together and don't leave someone out. I myself have been part of the evaluation process of tens of these NGOs. I've been audience to the changes that were recommended from the city council. I'm usually the dissenting vote. It's who I am. I ask hard questions. So that's one. I think the staff has worked very hard to come up with a streamlined process in which we can treat transparently the requests for NGOs. We just have too many needs in a smaller pot. That's my big problem. They heard from me earlier today, so none of this is surprising. But it's a good process. HISRAP has worked, and maybe it will do the good things we needed to do by bringing this additional level of funding and candidates into it. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Commissioner Kraus. I have already articulated my concern about the nonprofit work plan phase 1 allocating 500,000, and now we're looking at scaling that way back. So please add me to the voices that would like to see a higher amount. And given that we're looking at this for fiscal 28-29, there's time to figure out where that money's going to come from. So.
And just to be clear, so the committee's recommendation then is in hopes that it's 200 per year is what you're advocating for at minimum. Is that an accurate summary?
I'm actually hearing that the nonprofit work plan phase 1 allocated 500,000 in additional need. And so I'm wondering why we would pull back on that. If we thought that was a reasonable amount in the prior fiscal year, why are we?
Yeah, so you would want to know outside of the ongoing funding, which was put into a different part of the budget, whatever that delta is from that 500 with that ongoing subtracted, that's the number you have in mind per year.
The ongoing being the people that are folded into the
Neighbors
departmental
abroad,
budgets.
ED, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. We can do the math on that, but I think that can be something we also have as the range that you're recommending. That's the high end of the
Can't hurt
range.
to ask. Thank you.
We hear that as
Thank
the
you.
high end of the range. Okay.
That's where I am. I'm sure not everyone's going to be there, but I think it's an important conversation. And clarifying where these one-offs go. You know, the ones that don't seem to fit his wrap, that aren't in a departmental budget. I think we've got to get real clarity on where do they belong? If they do belong, where do they belong? Because I bet it's hard for them to feel like every year they're not even sure if they're in anybody's budget and they have to come and at the last minute hope that they're going to get funding. I just think that it'll behoove us to make sure, if we're funding somebody, they're in a category, we can explain it, we understand it. It's in a departmental budget, it's in his wrap plus, rather than one-offs. All right. Anything else from my colleagues? All right. Do you need anything else from us?
A motion that from Policy and Services based on staff recommendation that the council approve the expansion, taking into consideration feedback heard here tonight.
Yeah, I'll make that motion. I don't know if the clerk has, yeah, okay, great. Then I'll make the staff recommendation.
And while the clerk is typing that, I will point out, since you will have the joint conversation with the HRC in September, my guess is that may slightly tweak some of your recommendation to the full council. And so we can figure out how to fit that into the motion that's being presented.
I'll second that. When is the council reviewing the recommended expansion?
Sorry, I'm sorry. I'm afraid I missed your question, Councilmember Cottons.
Yeah, no worries. To Ms. Cotton Gaines's point about tweaking it so that it's clear what's being recommended to council. When is this going to council?
This would be going to council after your joint committee meeting with HRC.
Okay.
So just one option that the committee would have would be to defer voting on any recommendation until after that joint meeting, and you could vote separately as a body, as part of that joint meeting if you so desired.
Yeah, I thought I thought the staff recommendation was essentially kind of endorsing the joint session, not approving this now. It seems like we're a little too early on that. So just say maybe to recommend or to request a joint session between the Policy and Services Committee and the Human Relations Commission at our September ENS meeting.
Could we add to discuss the HISRAP plus proposal?
Yep, to discuss.
Chair, would you like to remove the plus piece of it and just treat it as his rep expansion so that we don't cause that confusion?
I don't want to be personally responsible for that decision. So I just wanted to point out that whenever you're doing something new and you give it a new name, it gets confusing. So I think it's something it's working. Do what feels right, and we'll just see how it gets discussed. If people remain confused at the September, that'll be more feedback. Okay, I think that's it.
Okay, I'll go ahead and take a vote. Councilmember Ruckdahl,
Yes.
Chair Lithcott Hames,
Yes,
Vice Mayor Stone,
Yes.
motion carries unanimously.
thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Alamos and Ms. Pigman, Ms. Cotton Gaines, appreciate you. Commissioner Kraus, Chair Kraus, thank you for your comments as well. Look forward to meeting with you in September. And Ms. Cotton Gaines, is that going to be our meeting that they attend, or we're going to find a date? What did we decide?
Very good question. While we're getting staff settled in for the next one, I will work with Ms. Pigman and see if we can get that to be your September meeting, actual PNS meeting date, or if it has to be one that jointly works for the two. I believe in my conversation with you, it was not of interest for you to do two PNS committees in September. So whatever day we pick, we would just make that your one PNS meeting of the month.
It does feel like it's going to be a long conversation, so I think it should be a dedicated meeting.
Okay. If I find anything else to squeeze in, I'll advocate in my agenda setting.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. All right, let's move on to item 3. Discuss and provide feedback on Housing Element Program 6.5, Alternative Housing Program, Objective B. Director Late.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and good evening. I'm going to ask Vishnu Krishnan to present our report on this.
Thank you, John. Good evening, members of the committee, staff, and members of the public. I'm Vishnu Krishnan, Senior Planner with the city. Tonight,
Could you move your microphone a little bit closer to your mouth? There we go.
Tonight, I'll be presenting an update on the alternative housing program, which is being undertaken as a part of the Housing Element 6.5 Objective B. So the purpose of tonight's discussion is to provide an overview of the alternative housing types that we've studied over the last year, summarize the Planning and Transportation Commission's direction that we received from its April study session, and receive the committee's feedback on potential implementation approaches, development standards, and incentives. Next slide, please. First, we want to talk about the overview of 4 different alternative housing models that were evaluated. We are looking at microhousing, shared housing, intergenerational housing, and senior housing. Second, we'll review the recommendations from the Planning and Transportation Commission regarding which of these housing types should be prioritized for further study and implementation. Third, we'll look for policy-level feedback on potential implementation tools and incentives from the committee. And finally, we want to discuss the next steps for the program following tonight's discussion. Next slide, please. So Housing Element Program 6.5 Objective B directs staff to evaluate innovative housing models, including microhousing and new shared and intergenerational housing models to help address the housing needs of aging adults, students, and lower income individuals. The housing element also directs the city to identify appropriate locations for these housing types, consider whether maximum dwelling units per acre standards present a constraint, meet with stakeholders and conduct public hearings, and ultimately develop zoning amendments for the city council consideration. So the underlying reason for this work is Palo Alto's existing housing stock is primarily composed of single-family homes and conventional multifamily apartments. So the demand for different housing options is the driving factor here, including housing affordability, demographic changes, and aging population and changing household sizes. So the goal of this program is to therefore look at whether different housing models and targeted regulatory changes can expand the range of housing choices available in Palo Alto. So this is consistent with the housing element's broader goals related to housing choice, aging in place, affordability, and efficient use of land. Next slide, please. As previously mentioned, we evaluated 4 alternative housing typologies. The first one that we're looking at is microhousing. It consists of self-contained dwelling units that are intentionally smaller than conventional studio apartments. The units are generally anticipated to be approximately 250 to 350 square feet and contain their own private bathroom and kitchenette. The next model, shared housing, it generally consists of private rooms or compact units combined with common areas such as kitchens, dining areas, or living spaces. Examples include co-living developments, co-housing communities, and graduate student residences. Intergenerational housing developments are intended to house residents from at least 2 different age groups. They may include shared amenities and social programming intended to encourage interaction and mutual support. And for the purposes of this program, senior housing was also considered, and senior housing here is intended to serve adults aged 55 and older. These developments may include independent living communities and provide amenities such as community gathering spaces, wellness programming, transportation assistance, meals, and recreational activities. The focus of the program is on independent senior housing rather than congregate care facilities such as memory care or nursing care units. And the reason why we excluded, we'll explain it in the next slides. Next slide, please. HCD uses census definition of a housing unit. In general, that includes a house, apartment, mobile home, group of rooms, or single room that is occupied or intended to be occupied as a separate living quarter. Based on this definition, individual micro units and qualifying units within shared housing developments count towards RENA. Intergenerational housing can also count when development contains individual dwelling units that meet HCD's definition of a housing unit. So the important distinction is that RENA eligibility is based on the characteristics of the dwelling unit rather than the age of residence. And independent senior housing units therefore count towards RENA, whereas congregate care components such as memory care and nursing care do not. The slide also highlights potential changes at the state level regarding group quarters and shared or co-housing arrangements. The broader issue is whether RENA should recognize a wider range of housing models that may currently fall between conventional housing and group quarter classifications. For Palo Alto, this is relevant because the city is evaluating housing models that may provide additional housing choices while also contributing towards the city's housing production goals. Next slide, please. We also looked at different state and regional policies that provide an important regulatory context for this work. We considered AB 130, which talks about expanding streamlining and environmental review exemptions for qualifying infill housing projects. AB 2097, which eliminates minimum parking requirements for qualifying projects located near major transit stops. SB 79 requires jurisdictions to permit increased residential development intensity within designated transit-oriented development areas. The state density bonus law provides additional development capacity and regulatory concessions for qualifying projects, including certain affordable and senior housing developments. And the MTC Transit-Oriented Communities Policy, which establishes regional expectations related to station area density, parking, access, and housing. None of these laws specifically establish a complete regulatory framework for alternative housing. However, collectively, they reduce some of the regulatory barriers that can affect smaller, more compact housing products. Next slide, please. For microhousing, now we're looking at the potential implementation approaches. And we're basically studying microhousing here because this is one of the housing typology that the Planning and Transportation Commission recommended. So for microhousing, we have three different approaches. The first one would be a comprehensive citywide zoning amendment. Under this approach, we are looking at defining microhousing as a distinctive use, integrating it into appropriate zoning districts, amending applicable development standards, and establishing design criteria and objective design standards specifically suited for this housing type. And approach two would take a more targeted approach. Rather than applying the changes citywide, the city would modify standards such as FAR, parking, usable open space, and maximum site coverage in selected areas that already have amenities and services. Approach three would coordinate the city's zoning changes with recent state legislation. This could involve focusing amendments on parcels within the TOD areas and the housing opportunity sites that are in close proximity to these TOD areas. The three approaches therefore represent different levels of geographic applicability. And we also made notes in the staff report about the PTC recommendation that favors transit, accessible, and amenity-rich locations where reduced parking demand, walkability, and access to services can support these models. Next slide, please. For senior housing, we have two potential implementation approaches. The first is a fixed senior housing overlay. Under this approach, the city would identify and map specific locations where the senior housing can be encouraged. The benefit here is predictability. Property owners and community would know in advance where these overlay apply, and the city can establish tailored development standards and potentially streamline review within those areas. The second option is a floating senior housing overlay. Under this approach, the overlay would not be mapped onto specific properties in advance. Instead, an applicant could request an overlay for an individual site, and the city would evaluate whether the site meets established criteria. This provides greater flexibility because the city would consider individual site characteristics and opportunities as they arise. The downside is it also involves more site-specific review and provide less certainty about where senior housing could ultimately be developed. The staff report also identifies examples of both approaches in other jurisdictions. We have fixed overlay in the city of Lafayette and San Mateo, and floating approaches were implemented in Foster City and Menlo Park. Next slide, please. Looking at the potential implementation tools, we've categorized it into development standards, process improvement, and financial incentives. The first category, development standards. This could include modified parking standards, adjustments to FAR and maximum site coverage, more flexible usable open space requirements, and minimum or maximum unit site standards, particularly for microhousing. The second category, which is process improvements, we looked into streamlining permit review, where consistent with applicable timelines and available staffing resources. Transportation demand management measures can also be considered. We were looking at establishing clear thresholds, creating a standard checklist that applies to alternative housing development, and evaluating alternatives, including a transit pass program. The third category is financial incentives. We are evaluating whether fee reductions or waivers could be appropriate, particularly for deed-restricted affordable housing projects. So the important distinction here is that staff report does not propose generalized financial incentives for all market rate projects. Instead, financial incentives would be generally considered for projects that provide demonstrated public benefit, such as deed-restricted affordable housing. So for market rate projects, the emphasis would be on addressing regulatory barriers that are unique to alternative housing rather than providing generalized financial incentives. Next slide, please. So looking at the areas and districts that we can consider for alternative models, we have South of Forest Avenue, San Antonio Road, California Avenue Pedestrian and Transit-Oriented Development Combining District, and North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan and area, and the ROLM Focus Area. These are the areas that we considered in addition to the TOD eligible properties around the Caltrain stations. The intent is not to establish a final list of locations tonight. So we want to make that clear. And we also want the committee's feedback on where you think it would be appropriate and what the staff should actually be studying going forward. Next slide, please. Looking at the direction we received from the Planning and Transportation Commission, we had a study session on April 8th with the Commission, and we received feedback. The Commission identified microhousing and senior housing as the preferred alternative housing models. The Commission also recommended prioritizing locations near existing transit, high quality transit. So we looked at identifying parcels in University Avenue, California Avenue, and in San Antonio Road Caltrain stations. In addition to transit, Commission's directive was also to consider proximity to existing services and community amenities. So by amenities, we are looking at parks, grocery stores, libraries, community centers, and healthcare facilities. Next slide, please. This brings us to the feedback we are requesting from the committee tonight. First, we're seeking confirmation that microhousing and senior housing should remain the preferred alternative housing models for implementation under Program 6.5B. Second, we are seeking confirmation that implementation should prioritize locations with existing high quality transit, neighborhood serving commercial uses, and community amenities. Third, for senior housing, we are seeking direction on the preferred implementation approach, a fixed senior housing overlay or a floating senior housing overlay, and the applicability of incentives for market rate senior housing development. Fourth, we are seeking direction on the next steps for developing zoning amendments for microhousing. And we would also like feedback on development standards such as parking, FAR, site coverage, usable open space, and objective design standards. And finally, we are looking at a policy level feedback on which development standards, process improvements, or incentives should be evaluated further before drafting zoning amendments and the next steps. Next slide, please. Following tonight's feedback, we will use that direction to develop the preferred senior housing implementation strategy. We will also begin working and preparing this draft zoning amendments consistent with Housing Element Program 6.5. The proposed zoning amendments would then be presented to the Architectural Review Board and the Planning and Transportation Commission for review and recommendation. Following that process, staff would return to the City Council. We want to note that there will be additional opportunities for public and the Commission to review and provide additional feedback as required. Next slide, please. That brings me to the end of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Krishna.
Yes, we also have Greg Goodfellow, our consultant. He is on Zoom.
Thank you very
Good evening,
much.
committee members. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Let's see if there's any public comment on this item, please.
There are no requests to speak on item 3.
All right. Colleagues, who'd like to tackle this very meaty issue first?
I can start off.
Go ahead.
So micro units, very tiny. If currently, doesn't state law require that you have a stove and an oven in the kitchen?
For micro units, yes.
Okay. And so that seems, if you're trying to really trim down the size, I would think something like a microwave would be sufficient. And that would free up that space if you're really limited on space, free it up for other uses that may be more valuable to the tenant. So is there any way that we can waive that regulation for having a full stove and an oven in a kitchen?
Thank you, council member. So the state sets forth the requirements. I think it says I'm trying to distinguish between efficiency units, which is not what we're talking about here. But I believe the state regulations set forth that you need to have a minimum of 150 square feet of floor area for a unit. That's a minimum floor. And a kitchen, which is, I actually don't know how that's defined in the state law, if it is defined. But in our local code, we define it as for the purposes of cooking or preparing food. I don't know that I would say a microwave by itself would qualify as a kitchen. We have approved, portable induction stoves as part of, an ADU. But
not a full oven isn't required.
Yeah, it's not. We're not looking at a full kitchen build out necessarily. I think a kitchenette concept is more likely.
Okay, yeah, that's reasonable. So for micro units, you mentioned 150, but apart from that, is there anything preventing us from building micro units right now?
No, there is no restriction as such. We've had projects in the past that have been proposed. They just never got built because the feasibility of it was not really, there.
Okay. And I guess,
I'm sorry, council member, maybe just because I am reading a quizzical look on the chair's face, maybe I'll just take a moment to share that. I think for a lot of the going back to the housing element and looking for programs to put in and also responding to the state's ask that we identify alternative housing opportunities in Palo Alto. Many of these uses that we're talking about here are already allowed in some form or another in the city. What they're missing really is clarity in our zoning code that defines the use, that establishes what the use is, some of the parameters, the regulatory standards that are associated with them, and the process. You could do micro units today, but our code only references, I think, I'm not even sure if our code does reference micro units. Maybe in the parking chapter, there might be a slight reference to it. SROs, efficiency units, is also a singular reference in our parking chapter. So if somebody's looking to develop one of these types of alternative housing developments, they're not finding a lot of guidance in our zoning code. So I think a lot of what this effort is to name the housing typology that we are interested in, to define it, and show a process by which it can be implemented. Now, I do think, and I think this bears out in the consultant's report as well, that some of our development standards today may actually impede somebody from may discourage somebody from wanting to actually build a type of efficiency unit, whether it's the open space requirements that we have or the parking requirements. So I think what we're looking at as a follow along sort of effort to this is, if we want to distinguish the type of housing typology, this alternative housing typology that we're interested in, where do we really want to focus it in? What parts of the city geographically? The PTC has recommended sort of these TOD areas, and that makes sense because parking is going to be a real financial draw, a cost to developers. And we already know through AB 2097 that there's no parking required in these areas. Now, as a community, of course, we have concerns about, the parking impacts, but that as a tool to incentivize housing is available. It doesn't mean that there's going to be development with no parking. In fact, we hear that developers do want to have some parking, but at least we've eliminated that cost from developers. And so I think a lot of this, and I'll ask Vishnu to correct me if I'm wrong, I think a lot of this is really about naming it, defining a process, and saying this is where we want to identify areas of the city that we want to try to encourage it, whether it's with development incentives or process. How can we make these pieces stand out more than they do presently in the code?
That's true.
That was really helpful. Thank you for that. Councilmember Rectal? You are on mute.
Sorry. Thank you. That was useful. I was thinking the same thing, is that if you're talking about a 300 square foot apartment and you're going to have 200 square feet of parking, that seems kind of silly. And having a downtown where at least you have a chance of them not having a car, or a better chance of them not having a car, they can have transit. So I agree. I would think near train stations would be a good spot. So today, if you had an RM40 and you want to do micro units, you only could put 40. Would they have to do a PHZ today if you wanted to build micro units on an RM40 lot?
So, no, it would be treated as any market. It would be treated as any multifamily development today. The density would 40 units per acre. If they wanted to go beyond that, then that would be limited, or they could provide inclusionary units, deed restricted units as a part of the development and take advantage of the state density bonus law. But if we're saying that we want to encourage a greater density for micro units, one of the things that I believe the report speaks to is maybe we allow a greater density for micro units if that's something that we're interested in also further incentivizing.
Okay. And so then we would not be having separate zoning. We would just say if RM40, if you have conventional apartments, it'd be 40 units per acre. But then if you had micro units, maybe you might be able to do 80 units per acre. That's what we're getting at?
As an example.
Okay. Okay. What about dorms, the shared housing? I thought that was not legal in Palo Alto today.
So I believe it would be treated as group housing, and we have made some. So dorms, as I think of them, at least when I went to school, didn't have kitchen facilities. There wasn't a cooking space. So to the extent that a dorm has restrooms, shared restrooms, and shared cooking facilities, that would be a shared housing typology.
Okay.
And that is permitted under local and state law.
Oh, it is. Is that recent? So I thought during the housing element, we were looking at that, and I thought I was told that that was not legal.
We wouldn't necessarily get the same RENA credit, or, it would not translate necessarily as the same amount of RENA units that could be generated from that type of development. But I believe we made changes to our local laws, I want to say within the last 5 years, to true up our standards to changes in state law to explicitly allow shared housing. But I'd have to go back and double check.
Okay. And How would shared housing be, back to the RM40, how would shared housing be evaluated for unit density for zoning?
Great. That's that's the type of, follow-on step that we would want to study further in working with the city attorney's office, because we look at density as a self-contained dwelling unit with cooking facilities and so forth. So I just don't know off the top of my head. Vishnu, do you know how that's assessed?
So if it is the case of a shared unit, it would, whatever is one unit, irrespective of how many rooms it has, will still be considered as one unit. So if we have to evaluate it to RM40, then it'll be 40 units with how many ever rooms each of these units have. One room is not one unit. A combination of two or more rooms in a unit is still considered one unit.
Oh, okay. So if you had a dorm with 40 bedrooms, that'd be one unit.
So again, I think there's a lot of, I want to be careful about a blanket answer to that. How we define, the state defines a unit in a precise way. And for us locally, it's a kitchen facility and cooking facilities as to be qualified for that. I think what Vishnu was saying is that in addition to, so density may not be the limitation in that example that you're raising. It may be the floor area, it may be height. There may be other controls that the city has as a part of its zoning that may ultimately contain or constrain the size of the development. It may not be the number of bedrooms per se.
Okay. So again, I think dorms, shared housing sounds like a really good chance. One thing you really want is a variety of housing units, and I think that would be a unique type of housing that there may be a population that's not served today that would help. For the senior housing, this is not senior care. This is just a market rate development where maybe there's some programming to attract seniors, or he got more detail about what exactly you envision for senior housing here.
So we're not looking at nursing care facilities. We're looking at market rate or even deed restricted senior housing facilities, but then they are actual just housing facilities that will not include care.
Okay. And how does that differ from a regular apartment?
Yep. This is age restricted.
Is that legal?
So yes, it's one of the two carve outs in housing law where you can have senior housing if, for 55 and older, and there's another exemption for 62 and older. I would defer to the city attorney to provide some legal guidance on
Just
that.
wait till you get to be 55, Keith, then you'll start hearing about them all.
Yes. Another 20 years, yes.
But your question's a good one, because it speaks to what I was commenting on earlier. You can have senior housing anywhere in the city where multifamily housing is allowed. We often hear about it as affordable housing, and we have codes that and the state law encourages affordable senior housing, and there's great concessions and density bonuses that can be derived from that. And I'll just note, senior housing, I don't think was originally part of our effort to explore alternative housing. It's something that was added on, and it was added on because it's light in our code today. And we thought, as a part of a discussion to this, we at least wanted to give some visibility into it. But it really is a different type of housing topology, and it's a little awkward, I think, the way that we've tried to square that into this report. And I'll take responsibility for that, because I think I was the one who asked Vishnu to include some comments on senior housing. But it's allowed today. The distinction is, do we want to elevate it in our code? Do we want to promote it more as do we want to define that type of housing topology? Do we want to give some additional incentives that the state already, above and beyond the state, Today, you can have a market rate senior housing development and it can receive a 20% density bonus and it can receive waivers to make sure that it can build to that 20%. That's without a single affordable unit as a part of that development. So the question is, do we want to make that more of a obvious alternative for somebody who's looking through, hey, what can I do with my property? I'm looking at the land uses. Do we want to spell out senior housing as one, and you get these incentives? Do we want to increase the development incentives for senior housing because we want to promote that more, because we feel like that's a housing typology that we need? But again, it's a slightly different animal than the alternative housing topics that are covered elsewhere in this report.
You're on mute again.
Sorry, I have background noise here, so I'm trying to mute. So have you done any work on this to study what kind of other zoning restrictions or zoning changes that we want to do above and beyond the state changes for senior housing?
We've actually not done any, we're trying to incorporate these two housing models into what we currently have. And there is no zoning changes that we actually want to do as a part of this process. The program does not call for it.
Okay.
But we may want, I mean, it depends. Just if I can clarify, we don't have any tonight that we're presenting to you. It may be, again, it comes down to a question of how much do we want to lean into alternative housing, and to what extent do our existing standards, which are more tailored toward a traditional apartment or multifamily housing development, how might they discourage some of the alternative housing types that we've discussed in the report? So it may be that we want to come back with some additional either density or reduction of setbacks or changes to parking standards. These are things that I think the team still needs to vet through. If we get a signal from the committee that, yes, we're interested in seeing more of this type of housing, we want to see it in this area, let's figure out how we can promote this more in our local regulations.
Okay. Yeah. My parents downsized into an independent living, and it was great because everyone around there was their same age. It was like they're back in college in the dorm again, and they really enjoyed it. So I think there's some use there. I guess you have limited staff time, and if this is something that's already allowed, is it worth more staff time? What do you think?
Well, there's an element of completing the program that is set forth in the housing element, and we haven't seen a lot of shared housing. We used to have the Hotel California or California Hotel that had basically, it was an SRO development, and it was at times used as a hotel and at times used as a rental. But I don't know that we have a lot of history with that in the city. And is it because we have, other land uses or different use of that property, or is it because we've not promoted, that type of land use or availability or established those regulations? Perhaps some of that, perhaps none of that. I couldn't tell you, but so council member, I think it's a question of, do we want to spend more time on shared housing? That's a question for the committee, I think, that we're asking, because right now the code is pretty silent on it.
Okay, so I'll bring up slide 12 and I can just walk through my thoughts on that. Yeah, so alternative housing types. I think shared housing, we have students at Stanford that might want to use it. We have other people who may not be able to afford a full apartment. So both shared housing and micro housing, I think that's kind of unique. Senior housing, I'm not necessarily against it. I don't think it's quite as unique. It could be built today, so I would put less work into that if considering you have a limited number of hours to apply to this. Prioritize locations, I think both those downtown would, or near train stations, just because of the transit issue, would be the preferred locations. And also because of the parking issues that we talked about. Overlay, I mean, I think you would want to leave the current zoning, but then maybe give bonuses to accommodate those types of housings. And tools and incentives, I in general prefer streamlining over waivers, because waivers means that we are subsidizing them. If we can find things that we really don't need to do and we can streamline that out, then I probably prefer that. But then I'm always worried also about overlooking things. So we have to use our judgment. But okay, that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Rectal. Is it all right with you if I go next? Usually I go last as chair. Is it all right with you? Okay. Well, thank you so much for bringing this. I find it an issue very near and dear to my heart. And I began by looking at the PTC minutes from April 8th and really didn't see them coming to a whole lot of conclusions. And for whatever reason. So I feel like you're trying to steer this forward as you should. And you just said I've added senior housing, and it wasn't necessarily a thing that was just, it was light in the code. So you wanted to put it here. And I want to share some of my thoughts about where I'd really like to see this go. I agree with the prioritization of locations in the downtowns, near existing high quality transit, places where we have area plans. This is where we ought to be putting these new smaller units. In terms of what types, micro housing, senior housing, we also had the comment in the report about student housing, intergenerational housing, low income housing. And so we had a bunch of categories that seem to be reduced to micro and senior in the report we got, but I want to expand it back up again. I want to kind of take a 35,000-foot view and say, if we want to be a proper functioning city with an ecosystem that supports people of all ages, which is what is required if we are to remain a functioning city. If we don't make room for people of all ages, we will hollow out as a city. If there aren't people here who are young and then having their own children, we won't need schools, for example. We don't want to become a retirement community. So I love the idea of thinking about the through line. If you were to grow up in Palo Alto and hope to live in the city that you grew up in and worked so hard in our schools, first you need some kind of small apartment when you graduate high school or college. Then maybe you're partnering up and you want to live in a slightly bigger place. Then maybe you have a kid or two and you need a single family home or a bigger apartment. But at some point your kids are gonna grow up and do their thing, and you're gonna downsize and you're gonna need senior housing. And then one day you might need care. And if we think of that through line and ask ourselves, does our housing inventory provide the right mix? Then I think this question of senior housing becomes super important, because we know that if seniors are in single family homes, they've got to be incentivized to leave those homes. It's very attractive to stay in your single family home in California due to our tax laws. So what can we do to incentivize them to downsize? And it's not just for their sake that they downsize. It frees up inventory of older homes for those young adults coming up to maybe have a chance. So we really need seniors to downsize and move on, to make room for others. And that's sort of part of the ecosystem. So I'm excited about that option for seniors. I'm also excited about this idea, keeping seniors in mind, of intergenerational living, because I've seen research that shows that when you put youth and seniors together in housing, it's good for the mental health of both populations. There's even a narrower group of youth who are transitioning out of foster care, who, by definition, don't have a safety net of family typically. So they age out, and then where do they go? There's actually, I think, a state law in California. I want to say, I spoke with a guy at Mid-Peninsula Housing who's in charge of biz dev there, a guy named Felix, and he was telling me about Assemblymember Rivas's law that 15% of a certain type of housing could be for transition age youth. So there's this thing about, you can build affordable housing for seniors, but you can also include 15% of those units for youth transitioning out of foster care. That's an example of how you can do intergenerational and benefit a couple of fairly needy populations. And apparently they have seen results that when you do that, like they did this in Boston, a place called Treehouse Foundation, 80% low-income seniors, 20% foster kids out of foster care. They had research-based results of those kids grow as they aged, avoiding all of the typical issues that foster youth end up having. And apparently there's an organization in the Bay called Fostering Promise that kind of focuses on these combinations and so on. I may be telling you stuff you already know, but in case any of that is creatively useful for you, I just wanted to offer it. As we think about lot C or lot whatever, the parking lots that are ours, or we hope they're ours and we can build housing on them, affordable housing, and we think about who should get the right to live in those. I think there's real promise in the seniors plus the most needy young adults, those who come out of foster care. For example, I tend to be more in favor, now looking at the types of units for younger adults, I tend to be more in favor of the SROs or the shared housing. The thing where you have your own bedroom, maybe your own bathroom, but I doubt it, your own bedroom and shared everything else. It's got to be cheaper to build that sort of, common living, dining kitchen with bedroom offshoots like a graduate school dorm with a proper kitchen, not just a microwave, but it's only one stove because you've got 5 bedrooms or you've got 8 bedrooms or you've got however many are allowed. And I imagine, and maybe it's just because I have 2 young adults in my life in their 20s who like to live this way, that for young people coming out of high school, college, grad school, the idea of living communally, sharing some of these common tasks of living, like cooking and dining and so on, washing, washer dryer, that they might find that appealing. But here I am at 58 saying, oh, the young people would want that. So it sort of begs the question, well, what do the young people want? And what could we do to find out, how could we make Palo Alto a more attractive living place for the young adults we're trying to attract here, who will hopefully have some children to fill up our elementary schools one day? What would they like to live in? And I think this communal environment, again, private bedroom, common, everything else, might be something that young adults would like. And I would love for us to figure out how we might survey them and ascertain that rather than somebody of my age just sort of guessing about what they might want. So I do think of it as this through line for, those young adults just starting out all the way through to people who are downsizing and ultimately perhaps ending up in care. So that is my feedback. I'm excited we're looking at this. I love the fact that you're trying to be more intentional in the code about here's what you can do, as opposed to it's randomly scattered around in certain places. I love the fact that we're going to really put a program out and talk about it and say, like, this is how you can do it. This is what it's called. This is what we allow. These are the considerations. This is the process. It's almost like, what we're trying to do with ADUs. How can we've done a remarkable job of increasing the number of ADU applications because y'all began, talking about it and streamlining it, making it easier for people to do. And so I love the idea that, we might end up being a city where people can count on, near those, Palo Alto has a lot of train stations, there's a lot of transit-oriented development possible here. You can go there, they've got these units, it's shared living or whatever you call it. I don't have the terms down, SRO, shared living, shared housing, micro unit, I don't know, right? But I think there's something very exciting brewing here, and I just want to encourage you to keep going and really lean into it. Yeah. All right, that's it for me. Anything for you, Vice Mayor?
Thank you. No, I think I generally align myself with the chair. I agree with the location that PTC. recommended. So I'm trying to pull up the slides here to give you the feedback. I definitely agree with the focus on micro housing, on senior housing. For senior housing, I like option one. I'd like to see this designed in a way to be able to incentivize additional affordable housing with senior housing. I think that's something that we've struggled with increasing senior housing, but we've really struggled with increasing affordable senior housing. I wonder too if there are ways to be able to incentivize affordable kind of senior housing with additional services like memory care. I think that's a real problem across the entire region, and with diseases of the brain increasing, like Alzheimer's and dementia. We know that we see the data, we see it's getting worse, and yet there's many people in my own family as well, and people I know who have struggled with that as they've aged, and yet being able to find those type of services without um, without your family going broke is incredibly challenging. And yet I don't know if there's many kind of government incentives out there to be able to kind of promote that. So if we're able to do that, that would be wonderful. I also like option one because I think that just provides greater predictability, and hearing from the director tonight about the fact that so much of this is already allowed but really unknown. And I know your department is already overburdened, and I think maybe challenging for prospective developers to kind of reach out and have these conversations, and to schedule those. So anything that we can do to kind of streamline that would be great. Intergenerational housing. I don't know if that's really worth the lift right now. So maybe when I'm not opposed to it. I just think we do need to determine what is the most effective use of our time. And then on single room occupancy housing units, so that's kind of like the micro housing where it's already allowed. It's just also not.
Yeah, I think there's I think in this report we defined single room occupancy as bedrooms which may or may have bath or kitchen facilities, but I think it's generally designed with shared facilities. So an SRO contemplated in this report would be bedrooms with shared facilities.
Yes. And then, so that's not a one-to-one for RENA credit.
That's correct. So so then you get to micro units, which I think in our code, we currently in the parking chapter describe as 450 square feet or less, but more than 150 by the state standard. That's a large micro unit, I would say. And I think this report comes in at about 250 and 350, which seems a little bit more correct. So somewhere between 150 and 350, I would say would be the micro unit. Yeah. Size.
And
that's a 1-for-1 because they do have kitchen.
That's 1-for-1. Yeah. Yes. Okay. But single room occupancy is allowed under our code.
It is allowed, but then in our code, it is written as efficiency units. It's not spelled out as single occupancy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I think a function of state law too. State law doesn't use, I don't believe, the term anymore, single room occupancy. I think this is an evolution over the past several, could be decades now, and it's now referred to as efficiency units. And efficiency units we actually use that term in our code when it comes to ADUs. We talk about that being, there's some connection that we make and we draw on state law. So an efficiency unit is 150 square feet or more, typically capped at the range that we're talking about for the micro units, has a kitchen, has a bath. Bathing facilities and cooking facilities. We're using that term of efficiency unit. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it blends in a little bit with what we're calling a micro unit.
Okay. Okay. So,
And this might be a good time to ask our consultant, Mr. Goodfellow, because he's the one who's done the research on this, and I might be making a whole mess of the definitions that are set forth in his report. So, if you don't mind, Vice Mayor, I'd like to ask Mr. Goodfellow to chime in.
yeah.
Director Late, you're doing a good job. I think what I would have pointed out earlier, just for clarity, is that the city has adopted definitions into the zoning code of shared units, student housing, efficiency units, and a big part of that has to do with new state density bonus law, which has integrated those types of units into state density bonus. I believe it's AB 684. And Director, that was what you were referring to earlier in the last few years of adopting some of these new definitions for so many of these different types of alternative dwelling units. I would also urge this committee to go back to the original, what we call the Opportunities and Challenges report, which has very detailed laid out definitions for all of these different types of alternative housing units, based on state law, based on HUD federal law, and drawing it all the way down to the local level. If you have any specific questions, please ask me now about definitions of these units. I can clarify further.
No, not okay. So wait, so does an efficiency unit have the bathroom and cooking in unit?
Yes, the efficiency
Okay.
unit comes from the International Building Code. I've got it right in front of me. This establishes that, quote, efficiency dwelling units shall have a living room of not less than 190 square feet, and that such unit shall have or shall be provided with a separate closet, be provided with a kitchen sink and a cooking appliance. That goes back to this issue of a microwave would be fine, other than a full oven, and be provided with a separate bathroom containing a water closet, lavatory, and bathtub or shower. So it's a very small unit, whereas a micro unit expands it a little bit. And some of the sizing that I researched in my report had to do with other cities. It had to do with recommendations from the Urban Land Institute, and of course from all of the stakeholder interviews I did with the architects that I did for this report, the results of which are also in that previously study. So that's where we landed on that 250 to 350. But the fact of the matter is there is no formal state or federal definition of a micro unit, only of an efficiency dwelling unit.
Okay. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I think the kind of the PTC recommendation of the micro housing, I think that's a good place to start, to be able to see if there is interest with developers and if there's demand in the community for that. And if that ends up being successful, we can further explore more efficiency units then at a smaller amount. And I think just have a deeper conversation about what just kind of, because when you start to get down to 150 square feet, now we're kind of more warehousing and what do those look like? So I'd like to learn more about that in the future. But I think for tonight, the PTC recommendations looking pretty good. Was there anything else you needed? No. Looks good.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. So I think across, if I could follow the through line between the three of you, there's the support for the PTC recommendation as a baseline. But I'm hearing shared housing is another area to explore from a couple of you. And I do think that the intergenerational housing is it strikes me as a bit of a heavier lift, but if the committee that would be an area where it'd be helpful to get guidance from the committee if there's support for us to build that, because that is something that we would need to develop new regulations around, and to develop. We could do it. There's models out there. Don't be concerned about the staff time to implement that. I'm more interested in the policy direction from the committee, and is that an area that you would like us to push forward on? That would be the one thing from this discussion that I'd like some direction on.
I mean, if it's not a big lift, I don't see any reason why we should oppose that. I think it creates opportunities that don't exist right now, and especially as we start to see an aging population that might need to downsize and be able to downsize with a younger family member or with an in-unit caretaker. I think it creates interesting things to address some of the ongoing trends and problems we've been seeing.
And for me, I think whether it's part of this housing element program or it's something we take into account when we're building out affordable housing on city lots, I think the concept of intergenerational is something we ought to learn more about, understand the research, and potentially champion. I raised it also because I was concerned that the report focused on a demographic, seniors, whereas the preamble spoke of students and young professionals, but now we were faced with recommendations of micro or seniors. So I wanted to bring back other populations. I'm not sanguine about us focusing on a demographic population called seniors without also focusing on a demographic population called young adults, because they're increasingly living in their nuclear family home because they cannot afford rent or mortgage. And that's a generational phenomenon. It happens to be the underlying focus of my next book. So I'm doing a lot of thinking about it. And so I do think they have to go hand in hand. If we're only focused on, oh no, the seniors, we are completely missing the other end of the spectrum. So I think we need a two-pronged approach.
I think intergenerational is a good idea. I'm kind of skeptical that we're going to get a lot of market rate people wanting to do this. But for example, on one of our parking lots, I think that would be a very good program to examine. So, Jonathan, you said you have the ability to look at that from a zoning standpoint or from a feasibility standpoint?
I was speaking from a zoning perspective.
Okay. I think the other two are higher priorities just because I think they're a lot more feasible. I'm not opposed to it, but I'm kind of skeptical that we're going to get a lot of private people wanting to build intergenerational, but I could be wrong.
Okay. So then maybe what I'll do is we'll focus on the three that we've talked about, micro, senior, and shared housing, and build those out more from a regulatory landscape. But we won't leave this intergenerational concept behind. We'll continue to bring that forward. We'll explore opportunities and how it might come together. We may not build out the full regulatory landscape, but if we wanted to do it, this is how we could do it. And if we wanted to pilot it maybe on a city project, this is what it might look like. So we can bring that information forward without spending the deep dive on something that may not have a more immediate benefit.
That sounds great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Does that work for you? Okay.
Yeah. Motion? What kind of motion do you need?
If you can verbally articulate your support for what I just summarized, that would be sufficient for my needs.
Sounds good to us, I think. Yeah.
Vice Mayor, your mic wasn't on, but I believe you said that sounded right.
Yes, he did say that sounded right. So we'd like to move the motion that Director Late just articulated.
I'll second that.
As usual, the clerk is like, thanks. You're leaving it to me to figure out. Councilmember Rectal, we're very aware that you're 2 hours ahead of us, and we're going to do our best not to keep you up too late.
Thank you.
Of course, part of that is up to you. So,
Yeah.
I am going to need some assistance with this one, please, just to make sure I capture everything.
So I might just, so do you have something that you're working with, or is it? So okay. Yeah, focus on, developing housing program 6.5, with attention toward, micro housing, shared housing, and senior housing, incentives. Actually strike that. And bring back additional information related to intergenerational housing and opportunities where that can be implemented later in the city.
Do we want to say anything about location? Do you need the fact that we're affirming the TODs or the downtowns? or-
Yes, thank you. After senior housing, if we can add with a focus on transit-oriented areas, downtown California Avenue, I think in particular.
If we were to add area plans, is that sort of redundant? Because they are sort of,
You can add area plans. I just as a practical note, I think for the San Antonio area, we would be covering that as a part of that effort, and not maybe as a part of that. I don't know. They're two in play right now, so I would, but we can say area plans.
it sounds like you're saying we're already doing that there. We could conceivably be doing that there. I wouldn't want that area to be left out. If you end up doing smaller zoning changes, I would hate for San Antonio to be left off of this.
Yeah. A lot of that area is single family zoned. And while it's subject to SB 79, which would permit greater density, it's a policy question for the council if we wanted to expand that. So we can include that as part of our analysis when we come back about where this would apply.
Is that okay with you? Okay, thank you.
Yes, I'm sorry. Great. So the clarification that Vishnu was noting is, if in your question, Chair, is do you want it to extend to the San Antonio Road area plan, which is the vast majority of it is actually not within the TOD area. Is it the intent to include it in that area plan? Yeah. Okay.
That's what I was asking. Yes, thank you.
Well, so in that case, then I would suggest that we add the word area plan in there too. So focus on transit oriented areas in the downtown area. I mean, we could even say
Downtown area, California Avenue, and San Antonio area plan.
And strike out in particular.
You also mentioned MVCAP in your report.
Which is a part of the California Avenue TOD. So.
Does that look okay to everybody? Yeah. Okay. Let's take a vote. Thank you.
Chair Liscott Hames,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Stone,
Yes.
Councilmember Rectal,
Yes.
motion carries unanimously.
Terrific. What great work. Thank you, Mr. Krishnan, Director Late. Appreciate you. Okay. Heading into 4 out of 4. Awesome. We're now looking at a discussion and recommendation to approve the scope of work for state and federal legislative advocacy and grant consulting and compliance services.
Yes, that is myself, as well as online. I have Miss Christine Pryor, who is also a super awesome champion in helping with our legislative agenda. So I'll keep this presentation very short. It's really just a verbal presentation and an opportunity to get feedback from the committee. In short, we have a legislative services contract. Until this fiscal year, it was for state and federal advocacy, as well as grants, support with finding grants, applying for grants, et cetera. And we cut the federal funding for this current fiscal year. So right now we just have state advocacy as well as assistance with grants. However, the item in front of you is asking for you to weigh in on the scope of all three in the event that throughout our RFP process or in a future year, we get the funding back for federal. We will at least have clarity on the type of work that you want them to do. And then it's just a matter of us implementing it. So for rewinding a little bit, we put the contract in place with our current legislative support services. It is Townsend Public Affairs currently, working with the city for state, federal, and grant support services. We did that RFP about 5 years ago, more or less. We're going into our last year of services with Townsend, and so we're really just trying to make sure we're clear from the city council on the type of work that you would like us to bid out for. This is from a good governance perspective and making sure that we just renew these contracts at some point and bid it out. Make sure you're getting the best level of services that are serving the city. And then the last time we did this process, the city council expressed an interest in making sure you can see the scope before we bid it, just to make sure that we aren't leaving anything out. So what's included in your packet today is the actual scope of work from the existing contract, which had some changes from the city council last time we were approving the contract with Townsend Public Affairs. So my question to the committee today is actually very open-ended, which is if you can share with me the things that you really want to make sure that are included in your state advocacy contract, that are included in your grant services and support, as well as federal. And if it's something that's already listed on here, I can reconcile that later. Just given the hour, I think it's easier if you just share with me what you're interested in being included, and then we can clean this up and take it to the council on consent to make sure the whole council is in agreement. And that concludes my overview.
Thank you, Ms. Cotton Gaines. Do we have any members of the public wishing to comment?
There are no requests to speak on item 4.
Okay. Who'd like to go first, colleagues? Vice Mayor Strong.
Yeah, no, I'll be quick. I appreciate this. I appreciate the 1 year expansion. I've been really happy with Townsend, and I think doing the extension is wise. And I really have nothing to add to the scope of services here. And I think Ms. Cotton Gaines and Ms. Pryor have been so well involved in this over the years, and knows exactly. I think has the real expertise in the city on this issue beyond the council. So really respect your work here, and hope that we'll be able to find the money in our budget for our to be able to do the work at the federal level, especially given everything the federal government is attempting to do and not do in Palo Alto regarding grants and everything else. So, yeah, I appreciate the work. I don't really have anything else to add to it.
Okay, thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Rectal, anything?
Yeah, I had one question for Chantel. You said that we lost the federal portion. Was that we reduced our budget and then we just de-scoped the contract, or what was the situation there?
Yes, great question. In this FY27 budget process, as one of the budget reductions from the city manager's office, we reduced the advocacy services to remove our federal advocacy work. And part of that is, of the 3 services that we just talked about of state, federal, and grants, we use the federal services the least, though we understand that there's definitely interest for us to advocate at the federal level. We are working mostly with earmarks and funding requests at the federal level, and just being really intentional right now with what we ask for and what strings are attached to funding. And so of the 3 sources this year, that was the proposal to council that was accepted and included in the budget to remove those services.
Okay. The only a comment when I looked through um, the tasks here. They all looked reasonable. The only thing that I want to add is that we had some situations last year where we had dated information. Part of that is Sacramento just changes so fast. These bills get gutted and replaced. And the PRC had old information that was like a week or two old when they had their meeting. And then by the time it came to council, it's even later. And so can we have some better, faster way of communicating the bills that are happening in Sacramento? And because even just publishing our memo, there's some lag there, but also what went into the memo was old, and that was not a good thing. So can you put something in there about rapid updates or something along those lines?
Yes, I can add some information about the timeliness of the updates that we receive, as well as Ms. Pryor and I were discussing ways that we can continue to engage with subject matter experts in departments internally so that we're also hearing bills that may be of concern from the departments. We can get that information to them as well sooner so we can make sure that our legislative agenda is covering the broad issues that impact the city. So yes, we can add that to the scope.
Okay, very good. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councilmember Rickdahl. My question also centered on the elimination of the federal, and I don't recall seeing that at all during the budget process, so I was surprised by it. Delighted to hear you say that we use the federal services the least, and so therefore it seems justified. I am curious, the state and advocacy are estimated to be 10.8 grand monthly, 129.6 annually. Do you have a sense of what the federal piece was on top of that?
I do. Just give me a second. I'll have to pull that up. You can ask another question in the meantime.
Well,
if you'd like.
The point has been made that now is not the time to be taking our eye off what the federal government is doing. So I am very interested in ensuring that we're not hampered in our ability to advocate because we've removed this item from the budget. So I'm just curious as to how much it is. That's really my only feedback. I thought the scope of work for the consultants in the contract, in the grant area and the state area looked, absolutely right on to me.
Great, thank you. I pulled up an old invoice that we have from Townsend. I will note that part of the rate that I'm going to share is because we have all three services. So essentially, when we bid this out, we told consultants they can bid on 1, 2, or 3, depending on the scope of the work that they provide. And so Townsend bid on all three, and that they won that. And then they gave us essentially a discount for choosing all three. So the amount that we are saving monthly for not doing federal is $6,000 a month. And so multiply that by 12.
So it was 16,000 a month and we've taken 6,000 away because we're not paying for the federal.
Correct.
Okay.
And Townsend has been gracious and didn't remove the discount, even though we reduced one of the scopes of services.
Okay. So I think you're hearing at least a couple of us, maybe all of us say that that's something to keep an eye on, whether we need to put that back in.
Okay, we will, it's good to know that the scope is adequate for the council or the committee. Sorry about that. And then we will keep in mind if there's any lighter touch version that is, depending on if we get savings on the other ones, maybe there's a way to still do some level of federal potentially. So we'll look at our options on that.
All right. So anything else, colleagues? Let's get a motion to approve the scope of work for state. Well, now we don't say and federal.
I think it's okay to recommend approval of the scope because we still want to know if we do have funding that I can move forward whenever funding is available with this federal scope.
Okay.
So maybe you can note in your motion just if funding were available for federal or however you would like that nomenclature.
Okay, so we need a motion to approve the scope of work for state legislative advocacy, grant consulting, compliance services, and federal legislative advocacy to the extent budget allows. Vice Mayor said that sounded perfect. Ms. Cotton Gaines did not agree. Go ahead. fix it.
I love it. I'll wait till it gets on the screen. Just the end of it sounds like we possibly may allocate funding this fiscal year, and we probably are not doing that this
Thought
fiscal
that's why
year.
you told me to add it.
So, I would say in a future fiscal year after allows, if that's okay. Right
I'll
there.
move that. I'll move it.
Awesome.
I'll second.
It does. Did we take public comment on this item?
We did.
Okay.
There was none. Oh, yes, we're ready to vote. I thought we were just editing. Just
Vice
Please.
Mayor Stone,
Yes.
Councilmember Rectal.
Yep.
Chair Lifcott Hames.
yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Terrific. We're almost done. We're going to go to our final item. Thank you, Ms. Cotton Gaines, for that, which is public comment on items not on the agenda presented virtually. Do we have any?
There are no virtual requests to speak.
All right, then I do believe our meeting is over unless Ms. Cotton Gaines has a further thought.
Just on your future meetings and agendas, I will work to get the joint meeting set up with the committee and the HRC. And then there may be one other agenda item, but I will work with the chair offline in the event that we need that.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Thanks to everybody for all your hard work. We'll see you next month.
Hey, good night.
Hey, Councilmember Rectal, we miss you.